Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant and welcome to my series of tutorials for getting started with Elite Dangerous. This tutorial will give you some hints and tips on how to drive the SRV. At times the vehicle can be somewhat difficult to handle, so this guide will help you overcome those problems. If you're looking for more involved guides for Elite Dangerous, I've created a few of those and I've linked them in the video description below. Do feel free to check them out. Without any further delay, let's get to it. So on this tutorial I'm using a control pad, specifically an Xbox pad. You will be able to use the hints and tips provided in this tutorial for mouse and keyboard as well as a HOTAS. I do normally use a throttle and stick to play the game with, but on this specific tutorial I thought it would be a bit more useful for people if I went through a control method that is probably a little bit more common. Now, one thing I highly recommend you do, or a couple of things actually I highly recommend you do, is change a couple of the bindings here. If we go down to the driving bindings, which are right at the bottom here, you want drive speed access. I'll put that on one of the triggers. I personally use the right trigger and I prefer that over one of the shoulder buttons because you've then got some control over the amount of throttle that you're using, much more easier control over it. It's an analog control rather than a digital input, which does really help. The other thing you're going to want to do is to put the handbrake button on, and that is here somewhere. It's right there. Bind that to a key because that will allow you to stop very quickly, and obviously the vertical thrusters, which might not naturally be bound by default. So when you've got those things bound, you can just put as much pressure as you like on the forward accelerator and you'll start moving forward. Release the key and you'll automatically stop. Now you won't be able to do that probably on a keyboard so easy because it hasn't got an analog input, but you will be able to do that on a throttle and stick, just up and down the throttle. And reverse is actually bound to the left shoulder button, but if you want to come to a quick stop, just tap the acceleration and you will stop. Reverse, tap the acceleration and you'll come to a stop, and you can set whatever reverse speed you like, so maximum reverse. There's not actually an analog axis, there's not an axis input for reverse, which is a bit of a pity, but we've got a way around it. And when you actually want to stop, if you're going forward and you want to quickly come to a stop, put on the handbrake. I've got the handbrake to only be used to hold, but you can use it to toggle as well, and you'll find that will be infinitely valuable. The handbrake is something you really can't do without. So let's have a bit of a drive around then. Now when you're driving on areas like this, I've found a bit of a flat area here. Some areas are much more hilly than this, a lot more bumpy, but when you're driving around, hold down the throttle about 50%, maybe 75%, or set it to 75%, especially when you're on more hilly ground. If you go up to 100, you'll find that you'll bounce and bump all over the place. Now you can see there I went a bit too fast and I've rolled and bounced and taken 3% damage to the hull, and part of the reason for that, aside from hitting the ground too fast, is because my downward momentum was too fast. And now if we look at the heads up display right there in front of the screen, there's a couple of the things we can see. We've obviously got the target reticule, which indicates where we're going to fire. To the left and right of that we've got our pitch, and that is currently at -4. -2 is 0. That means we're pointing directly towards the horizon. A minus means we're pointing down, and a positive number like that means our vehicle is pointing upwards. So there are very important things to pay attention to. It lets you know whether you're going up or downhill a lot. For example, here you might think you're on some flat ground. It looks relatively flat, but it's actually on a 6-degree downward slope. And that's important because when you come into some slopes, some very steep slopes, you might think you're relatively flat and you might be wondering why you can't actually go forward, and that could be because you're at a 40-degree angle, for example. So that information is important to pay attention to. The other information to pay attention to is to the right of those pitch numbers, incline numbers, we have a little bar there which just appeared, and you can see that is currently 0, but as it increases, the number of bars increases, that indicates the amount of speed we're falling at, or the amount of momentum we're actually falling at or rising upwards at. We've got our height indicator obviously in meters there, 14 meters, 18 meters, but we've got a momentum to the right of that, as I'm just mentioning there. And the faster that goes, the more full that is, the harder you're hitting the ground at. And you can see when it actually reaches the full amount, you will take some damage. So the idea as you're descending down is to try and keep those bars at the minimum amount possible, and you'll find you actually take a lot less damage that way. So if I head towards one of these ridges here and jump over it, you see I'm going to go full speed, stick the booster on. You can see I'm now going way up into the air, 30 meters, 40 meters, 50 meters, 60 meters now, and I've got no throttle left in my engine there. That's indicated by the bar on the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Now I can try and maintain a little bit of thrust coming down here and try and slow my descent, and I shouldn't take too much damage. Now I did take 4% damage there. Just to reiterate on the functions I mentioned a moment ago there, on the bottom right hand corner of the screen you've got the same three functions that you have on your ship. You've got systems, which powers your shield, ENG, which powers your engines and your thrust, and WEP, which actually powers your weapons. Now the more pips you put into them, the more energy you're going to have in reserve for that particular function. So when you're jumping around, you need thrusters. Your descent velocity then is something very important to pay attention to. Don't let your downwards descent get too fast. Don't go too high up in the air without having the thrust to counteract it. And you see here, I can actually slow down my descent to have a very gentle touchdown there. So don't go too high up in the air unless you really need to. Basically it's a life or death situation, or you're just having a bit of fun. Now another problem a lot of people have is they find their vehicle spins out a lot, and that's because they tend to oversteer. Turn too hard on the steering to the right there and you're going to spin out. Now this is going to be a problem with keyboard, because obviously if you're using the keys to steer, you're either full steering or not steering, and that is going to cause you to spin out a bit. So as with everything here, it's important to take things in steps. About 75 to 50 degree thrust velocity here on your throttle, and only turn about 50% on the steering, and you'll find that you won't spin out if you do that. Still get quite a decent speed up and you won't spin out. You'll keep control of your vehicle, and if you do start to spin just as I did there, you can counteract it by a slight touch to the stick in the opposite direction and just come off the throttle if you need to. So here's some more rugged terrain here. We're going to go down into this crater and have a look. Now when you're down in these areas, the slightly dark areas, do remember you've got lights. The lights are currently off. We got half beam here and full beam. So depending on what sort of environment you're in, you might want to have slightly brighter lights. So you can see our descent here, our downwards pitch is around about 12 to 14 degrees, so fairly gentle slope. And there's a lot steeper ones in the game, but that's something to keep an eye on. Now when you start bouncing around here, one thing that will help you stop spinning out is if when you're in the air you release the accelerator and then only apply it again after you've touched down on the ground. This will stop your wheels accelerating while they're in the air without any resistance, and as they touch down they've got resistance from the ground again. You can then apply the acceleration again, and you can see there as I jump in the air, if you keep an eye on my speed marker, you can see that as my vehicle leaves the ground I actually release the acceleration a bit, and that helps you maintain a little bit of control. And the more practice you get at that, the better you'll be able to be at maintaining your forward momentum and speed. Now the surface also has an effect on how well your SRV drives. If you're on an icy planet, you'll find that you're likely to slip out a lot more than spin out than you will on a regular rocky planet like this one, so do keep that in mind. When your vehicle leaves the ground, the steering axis will actually change in the way it operates. When I'm on the ground here, the steering axis obviously steers the vehicle. Left and right turns you left and right, and you can see if I stop that the wheels and the tyres actually turn. And the pitch axis up and down don't actually do anything. But when I leave the ground with the thrusters, the steering axis actually rolls. Left and right actually roll your vehicle, and up and down pitch your vehicle. So when you're in the air, the controls actually change and they operate much in the same way as they do when you're in your ship. And it also allows you to keep control of your descent a bit better. So if I start falling awkwardly here, you can reposition your vehicle. So you might find that sometimes as you jump over a ridge, as you bounce over a ridge here, your vehicle starts going at odd angles. So you can use the roll and pitch to try and return it to your flat orientation again. And if you're not sure what way is level with the ground, just use the pitch ladder that's in front on the heads-up display. Now you will find that your SRV does take damage. It's pretty much unavoidable unless you're an exceptional driver, and even then I'd wager that pretty much anyone is going to take damage with the SRV, even on light gravity planets like the one I'm on here. And really there's not much you can do about that. The shield is there to take damage from weapons. It will not take damage from impacts with the ground. And that is a design choice made by Frontier, something they think adds to the gameplay. If you do take some damage, you can have a look at the synthesis menu here, and there is a repair option. You can repair your vehicle here. That will take it straight back to 100% on the hull again. So don't really use it unless you're down to quite low on the hull, because it's a bit of a waste if you're up at 80%, because obviously you can take quite a bit more damage yet. And there it tells me I've got 3 repairs available. So this sort of ground is where it gets a little bit awkward to control your vehicle on, and this is where you're going to need to combine all the tips I've actually mentioned so far, and that's keep adjusting your throttle, don't keep it constant, don't oversteer, keep an eye on the pitch ladder on your heads-up display, and remember that when your vehicle leaves the ground, the steering actually changes to roll, and you can reorientate your vehicle to try and keep it level with the ground. That just about covers everything then, and I hope it helps you out somewhat. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time. Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant, and welcome to my Getting Started Horizons guide. Now this will help you whether you're a beginner or a veteran player, but it does assume that you're familiar with some of the basics of the game. If you need a complete run through right from the beginning, I have another tutorial that you can access from the video description. Do check out the link. But if you want to jump right in from planetary landings and get yourself off the ground, this is the place to start.